Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on this rainy evening. I'm Sarah Winkleman. I'm the Director of Education Programs and Services for the JCRC of Greater Washington. I know I've met some of you on this call, but not all of you. And just if this is your first time with JCRC, just want to say a little bit that we're sort of the outward face of the Jewish community that works in government relations, community relations, intergroup work, and we now have been doing a lot of work in the education space. And as you as I state the obvious, it's been a hard year, and we know that high school students, we've been doing a lot of programs for them throughout the year, and some of those that were graduating and parents were really interested in sort of talking about what's happening on college. And Adena and Rabbi Daniel were nice enough to take their time because they're very busy and to talk to us tonight, because what we really want to hear from them, and what we said to them is sort of what has been their experience, what can we learn from them, and how can we all help, how can we help our kids, for those of us that have kids starting the college journey. So I feel like my job in the K through 12 state is help people bring their full Jewish identity to schools. And, I think many of us want that to be the case for our kids that are entering college. So thank you, Adena and Rabbi Daniel. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to ask them a few questions that are based on the things I've been asked and things that some of you had wrote in when you signed up to come on the webinar. And then after we ask those questions, we're going to open it up to the group. We're a small enough group that we can open up and people can ask their questions directly. Or I think Charlotte's helping us, even though she's not on screen now, and she is going to monitor the chat. I think you can only chat to her. Is that correct, Charlotte?
You can use the Q&A function and the questions will come to me and the panelists so we can see them.
Okay, should I tell you that I don't see? Okay, whatever. I'm not going to worry about that. I can't see it because I don't need to have it. So from my experience, I know that what we read in the newspaper isn't exactly what is going on and what is the whole story on campus. And I know it's been a difficult year for you. And I would love each of you to introduce yourself and then maybe share a little bit from your perspective. What were the successes and challenges on your campus? And Adena, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invite to Charlotte and to Sarah and the JCRC. It's so nice to be here. I started my summer with a JCRC meeting, and I feel like I'm ending my summer with one too. So I'm happy to be here. My name is Adena Kirstein. I'm the Executive Director of GW Hillel. I have been on campus at GW. I'm starting my 15th year at GW and a few more before that at NYU, which is my alma mater. Believe deeply in the work. I always say every year is the same and every year is different, right? And last year was a good proof of that. We're always going to have Rosh Hashanah. We're always going to have Shabbat dinner. We're always going to have nervous first year families. And then there's always going to be a curveball that comes our way and keeps us on our toes. So very, very thankful to do the work that I do and to really see the growth and the trajectory of students. I feel deeply it's a holy, holy period of their lives. And I just get to watch what's happening and sometimes have really good conversations as a part of it. So that is absolutely how I still feel about it, despite the challenges that are at hand right now. I would say, the joy of this year, and I do use the word joy with intention, is that never before, at least in my lifetime, have I seen students thinking so deeply and so critically about what it means to be a Jew. And I feel that as a moment of massive opportunity that we as a Jewish community, and I don't just mean the people that work professionally in the Jewish community, I mean all of us, parents, alumni, community members, any old Joe on the street, has a responsibility to support our students in navigating, right? All of us are thinking deeply about how we have to engage in the world, how we're going to read news headlines, how we're going to think back on how we were raised and what values we want to espouse to others. And that is the opportunity of this year that I really want to harp on. The challenge is, there were a plethora of challenges. I think for now, the hardest part for me is seeing what our students are carrying. It's heavy. I just did some writing after a trip to Israel, and I talked about, there's a great piece by Billy Crystal. He talks about grief and how grief is like carrying around boulders, right? There's a heaviness to the year that our students, and sometimes all they want to do is say, do you see how heavy this is? Do you see how hard this is? And other times they just want to ignore the boulder and they want it to be invisible and they just want to go about and be college students and go out on a Thursday night and do their things. So figuring out how to support them through that heaviness, I think, has been the biggest challenge.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Daniel Novick. I'm the executive director at Mason Hillel, serving George Mason University, Northern Virginia Community College, and all college-age, college-stage individuals in Northern Virginia. I'm starting my 4th year here. Prior to that, I was the assistant director at GW Hillel with Adena, so it's really great to be here with my mentor, colleague, and friend, continuing to learn from her, even just tonight, just now. I mean, a lot of what we're going to say, we're just going to echo off of one another, I think. I'm invested in this work because we really see college and the college stage as that opportune time to work with individuals as they formulate who they are as people, who they are as individuals, what they think, how they think, and who they are on their journeys. And that can be evident in so many different things. And I think the October 7th aftermath and the months that the whole year basically was the opportunity to see them deeply question and struggle with who they are as individuals, who they are as Jews, who they are as pro-Israel students. What does it mean for them to be pro-Israel? Well, how do they define what Zionist means to them? How do they talk about that with others? All those things is part of the joy of working with college students. And I really saw students really learning how to be more open and vulnerable about what they're feeling and how they're feeling it within our Jewish community. Hillel's, I think, navigated the year by creating open and safe spaces for students to explore and to process. And I think that our students have learned through that how to be more open, how to express their sadness and their grief, how to talk about, their roommate who said something perhaps anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist, the sadness in that before they actually dealt with what to do with it and how to deal with it. The challenges, I think, in addition to what Adena said, a unique challenge for Mason Hillel is that George Mason University, about 2/3 of our students are commuter students. So we're kind of a hybrid campus where we have residential students and commuter students, and certainly within the Jewish population, we see that as well. And so a challenge is to navigate, students being in different arenas or different communities and dealing with this in different ways. How do they deal with it at home with parents? How do they deal with it at work in their jobs? How do they deal with it with friends from high school who still might be in the area? How do they just, all these different kind of, when you're on and off campus constantly, they're just trying to navigate how to deal with all of this in different ways. And I think a challenge is to support them in realizing that's not a one size fit all model, and that it can be different in different scenarios. So that's a challenge we're kind of facing at Mason Hillel with regard to all this.
Thank you. Well, so then I want to ask each of you maybe a little bit of a more specific question based on what you said. First of all, I think, by the way, Adena, that image of the boulder is very powerful and very helpful for sort of thinking about this moment. I think for all of us, not just college students. But I saw some beautiful things at GW, and I loved how you incorporated the community. I mean, it was how the Hillel had everyone come together and do a rally to support Jewish students. I guess I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more specific, if you can think of an example that might show a challenge that you worked with and how you approached it and dealt with it. And it could be either one that was successful or one that you sort of struggled with. And don't worry, Daniel, I'm going to get to you with the similar. Do you want me to ask him his question and then you can think about it? Okay. Rabbi Daniel, sorry, I went off script with our questions we originally came up with. I'm making it hard for you guys. interesting about the commuter students, I would say that I heard from Charlotte because she was a student, I think, in the winter. And I know that like she was able to meet with the president of the university. Like I felt like there were these amazing opportunities for her to be an advocate about Israel. And I'm sort of curious from your perspective, it's interesting about the commuter. I didn't realize that was your percentage of commuter students. Like, can you also share maybe a specific example of a challenge and how you approached it and were successful? It doesn't have to be, I want to say it could be someone on your team's challenge. It doesn't,
Yeah.
just to give us a little bit of a
Sure.
flavor and taste of what it really is.
No, absolutely. So I think a challenge in general that we faced that is different from GW is that Mason is a public institution. And while there are many similarities and differences between public and private, I think, in working with our administration, the university administration, a lot of challenges we faced were navigating the public university arena within the Commonwealth, within Virginia. I realized very quickly that the General Counsel of Public Universities in Virginia are assistant attorneys general. They are under the AG's office in Richmond, right? And so that changes the calculation. And anytime there was a question of why isn't the university doing this or that, when I was in conversation with the university, it was constantly, well, we're seeking guidance from the AG's office. When I called up the AG and I had one-on-one meetings with the AG, like it seemed to be a different story there, right? So like my personal challenge, which wasn't the question, was like, all right, I was thrown into the political game. I was thrown into politics, and we all, I think, were thrown into politics in certain ways, depending on kind of the communities we're part of. But that was a challenge in working with our students and working with our community who were seeking clear answers right away. And the legal issues matched along with the policy issues, all kind of had to be gone through the AG process. I don't know if that's the right or the wrong way, but that was certainly my observation of it by being in relationship with the key players in the university's administration. A specific, you asked for a specific there, was around a bench. We had a bench at university. Student organizations are allowed to enter a lottery system to be awarded the opportunity to paint a bench. There's like 50 benches. There are multiple student organizations, but the SJP group was awarded a bench. This was prior to October 7th. They got to paint a bench. They painted it with their logo, and they painted the phrase "from the river to the sea" on it. Which opened up a year-long kind of exploration of, is that allowed on public property or is that not allowed on public property? And that challenge was never really resolved, but the steps we took to kind of work with it was being in conversation with the AG's office, being in conversation with those who understand free speech law, and giving us the language to communicate out to the community the reasons why that still was allowed to be on that bench, and that we were hearing that directly from elected officials in Virginia. And how can we then reposition our energies to realize if they do have the power here, then like, what does that mean for our elections? What does that mean for all of that? Like, are we focusing on the university administration appropriately with this specific case, or should the attention be on politicians? That kind of all evolved from that one case of the bench. The bench no longer is around because it's a new year and they were not selected in the lottery.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. I feel like that example sort of exemplifies the struggle that you're having. I mean, and the fact, even though I know it will be different for Adena, I think that
and there's always a behind the scenes look, right? Like Adena and I have story after story after story about what we're hearing, what we're observing, that you can't capture in a social media post. You can't. You can't capture it in comments on a Facebook group. You really can't. So I've always said, like, I'm always happy to share the behind the scenes story in partnership with my colleagues at the university and in the state, but there is always that story that I'm happy to share, and this is one of those cases.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Adena, did I give you enough time?
Yeah, I know. Of course, I had 3 that came to mind the minute you went to Dino. There were many, an early example I would say was, right after the 7th, when everyone was hanging up hostage posters. Of course, our students who are at a perfectly developmental moment are like, "Where, and so your goal is to both honor that energy, right? And also kind of see the bigger picture of what's happening on campus administration wise, other students, the news, etc. And say, okay, how can we find a way to make sure we fulfill that desire and that need that our students had, which, I mean, I had too. I understand very much why they wanted to do it, while also limiting any, I don't want to add to the tension. I want to channel the tension in a positive direction. So we made a strategic decision. We're on a very, main thoroughfare on 23rd Street, which leads right down to the mall. A lot of tourists are going down to the State Department, et cetera. And we made a strategic decision to put the hostage posters, after speaking with students, on the inside of the wall, on the inside of the window instead of the exterior of the window. Which felt so much better to our students, because I don't think they were worried they were going to get torn down the minute they got hung up. That was number one. But number two, it has been I always say it's the best thing that I did all year, because it gives me, it gives me, I always call it the power of the pause. If you come out of our building, inevitably, if you stand there long enough, you're going to see a tourist who maybe isn't from Washington, D.C., and they're with their 12-year-old child, and they sit for a second. You'll see the child say, like, "What is that?" You hear them talking to each other. They pause for a second. They look at these people's faces, and then they keep walking. And I think to myself, there's a lot of good work around passive education. That's kind of what I keep thinking about it. It's not, come hear the speaker on Israel, come hear the, one-time shot where hopefully your whole life, we all know very few of us go to speakers for an hour and walk away and say, "Oh my God, my life has changed. I'm doing everything different," right? Our students, well-meaning people call and say, "I really think you could bring this speaker. If you just bring this speaker, suddenly magically everything will be better," right? For me, having those posters in the window is a much more powerful educational tool that has much wider reach than any phenomenal speaker could have. That's one challenge that comes to mind. Another, more broad one, and I know that Daniel understands this, is all throughout the year, especially at moments of high tension, we inevitably heard from many, 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 many people. The phone would be ringing off the hook, very well-meaning, very concerned, alumni, parents, community members. What can we do? What can we do? And it came from a really, really good place. And not but, I have a great rabbi who always says not but, and it makes a lot of time. We have to take a lot of time on it, right? And I don't want to negate and not answer that real desire and call to help. But I also oftentimes 9 times out of 10 think that their offer isn't necessarily what our students need at the moment. I really have to keep focused on what our students. So what we did in response is we said, okay, what do our students need, and how can we, proactively share that back out? So for example, it's a very basic, simple example. We made an Amazon wish list. We filled it with things like puzzles and bracelet making tools and stuff like that. And I can't tell you how many times I would see a stressed out student sitting there doing a puzzle, and it was such a gift. That $10 puzzle made a really big impact, but we had to do some intentional work to channel the energy of these individuals from outside looking in, who had read a headline, were very worked up and wanted to do something, but it didn't necessarily align with what students actually needed.
Beautiful. Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I know I live nearby and I've walked by that, and it's very powerful. So thank you. Those are great examples, and I appreciate you sharing different. And for those of you, the parents who kids are going freshmen, we're going to get some tachlis. Don't worry. I promise, before this time's up. So I guess the next question is really about sort of, is there a takeaway from last year that you're going to bring to campus this year? Because I wish things were going to be better, but I have a feeling we're in for another hard year. And unfortunately, yeah. So I guess if you had any thoughts.
Adena just said it, but we need to listen to our students. I wish that was on top of our minds every single day. We tried for that to have been the case, but in order to listen to our students, we need to know who our students are. We need to understand where they're coming from, and that takes time to build that relationship. And I often think, like, were there missed opportunities last year as we were navigating the difficult environment where we missed the opportunity to be in relationship with students. So we're entering this year trying our best to not forget that that is the core of our work, and that can inform how we deal with tough campus climates, so that we're not guessing there what our students want or need. Like, a lot of it is sometimes guessing, but like in the heat of the moment, but the areas that we felt to be most successful last year were areas where we could easily pinpoint for the university what students were feeling, how they were feeling it, what they were saying, and that requires a relationship building. So to prioritize that, bring the students into that relationship process with the university, with our elected officials, with all of our stakeholders, like the more student voices we can highlight and use to help us figure out how to do this, the better. And I wish I brought the students in more throughout the process last year, and we plan on doing that this year.
So I'm curious, do you both have like freshman retreats? I mean, I know they all have different, and are you already getting a sense that more people are signing up? Because I would think that there would be more of a desire to connect. I don't know if you're seeing that.
For us, it's pretty steady. It's no higher, no lower.
Okay.
You know, there are things that have been through the roof with us attendance wise, and there are other things that I would think would be through the roof and they're not. And it's hard to figure out. We did some student survey work a little bit after the semester. I wanted to give it a beat so people could take a deep breath. And, you know, they're saying to us, I'll give you a perfect example. 3 years ago, I mentored a professional who was a first-year employee at a school in Boston. And he was so proud because he was doing a dog petting event at his Hillel, and something like 1,200 people had come through the Hillel that day. And at the time, I was like I was so annoyed about it, because I'm like, that is not why we're here. That is not our goal. That's not, like, what is Jewish about it, right? So fast forward 2 years, what do we have like 4 times this year, GW Hillel dog petting events? Because students are telling us repeatedly they want to chill. They want to come into the Hillel so that they don't have to have high level thinking. They don't have to go deep. They don't have to, you know, do these mental gymnastics that they're doing every single day out on campus. They just want to like sit down, pet the dog, do the puzzle. And right now that's a challenge for us, because in our kishkas, you know, and I'm sure Daniel would say the same thing, that's, I'm not here to pet dogs, right? I'm here to build the Jewish future. So how do we kind of strike that balance for our students in a way that is both going to, again, like Daniel said, listen to what they're saying to us while also pushing them ever so slightly towards something bigger? And the attendance numbers, you know, the things that people are coming to, at least the GW, are the relaxed, low barrier for entry things, not the more sophisticated intellectual pursuits.
That's interesting. Okay.
Mason Hillel is hosting a dog petting thing for one of our Welcome Week events.
I mean, it makes you want to jump, but I get
because that's what they're saying. I keep on saying, I was like, it's the first week of the semester. You're not stressed yet. Guess what? They're already stressed, right? Like, I think that's the mentality of a student. Like, there are not like the cause of the stress is a different cycle throughout the semester, but there's always stress. There's always anxiety based off of whatever it is. And that's something we learned by listening to them.
A little bit our society right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a mental health challenge before any of this happened.
Right.
Yes.
I agree. So I do want to get to the question of like, what, for those of us that have kids going off to college,
Yep.
What do we need? What suggestions do you have for us to talk to our kids?
The first thing I'll say, and I say it a million times, I was going to answer to your last question, is constantly to be asking ourselves and to be asking your student, but especially yourself, what is within my control and what is not? I think we have this false notion that things are within our control that actually aren't. What is in your control is checking in on your student, talking through things with them, opening the door and recognizing they're not always going to walk through it to have heavier conversations, right? There are plenty of things you can educate yourself more deeply than the, you know, clickbait article that came up on your Instagram feed. There are a lot of things within your control. And I think as a parent, especially from afar, always asking yourself that question can dictate your actions subsequently. I certainly think opening the door to have a conversation about all of these things, have you thought about what Zionism is? Just kind of having a casual conversation before they head off to school, no pressure, no heaviness, not reactive to anything, and see if they want to talk about something. If they don't want to talk about something, but you might be introducing a vocabulary that either is very much a part of their lives already, or, they haven't thought about it ever. What is Zionism? Right. So even having that definition for themselves before they walk into a classroom might be something that's helpful. I also think as a parent, doing some baseline research, not about who do I call when I'm angry, but, if my student has a challenge, how do they report it? If I'm concerned about their mental health, where's the counseling center? Is the Hillel offering mental health support? Is, just having some on a good day, not on a bad one, right? Before anything goes haywire, and God willing, it won't. But just to have some basic understanding of the infrastructure of the university, because I think people oversimplify. They think, the president did this or the president didn't do that, right? There's so many people working throughout a university system that are there to help support your student as they navigate college life.
I want to add on to the baseline research piece because I mean, my whole thing has been like, there's the behind the scenes look, and I want parents to know what that behind the scenes look and work is, so that can inform how they're talking about all this with their student. If all they're saying to student is, I saw this on Facebook, like, what the heck is happening on your campus? And the student's like, it was pretty quiet today, nothing was happening. That creates tension between parent and student sometimes, where like, oh, student doesn't care so much about this, and like this is a really big deal, or whatever it is. Like, I just think that the more baseline research that we can have parents do, I think the better situated and prepared we all, like, the family unit can be. Other ideas about how to get that, depending on the Hillel and the university. I sent a few parents to some of my board members who were willing to talk about some of the work we were doing. I think, Hillels have board members. They are fully aware of the work that's happening through their board meetings. I would love to connect parents who just want to understand the behind the scenes look, so that they can help their child to just get like a quick understanding of like what happened last year, and like, so I can like not at all to like nitpick what was happening, or not at all to like, prepare their child for best or worst case scenario, but just to get an understanding. I as a Hillel director would be thrilled to have parents have quick conversations with parents beforehand, just to be like, here's what we're doing, or to have them with our board members who know as well. I was gonna say something else, but I lost my train of thought.
I'm going to add one thing to what Dana said. In the same way, I encourage our students to think critically about the media that they're consuming. I really would encourage parents or loved ones of college students to do the same. I have so many, I can't tell you how many parents I have who sit on these WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, and they'll say to me, Adena, it seems like they're always negative and angry and toxic, but I just want to like stay and watch just in case there's anything that, right? They kind of stay to pay attention, but that silent majority of individuals, I don't think it's helping you to witness kind of the chaos of some of these, again, well-meaning social media communities. So it raises the temperature for my parents. I see it and they get on the phone with me frantic. And when, like Daniel said, you peel away the layers and talk behind the scenes, they inevitably take a deep breath and they're like, yeah, I'm not so concerned after all. Like, why do that to yourself? Don't put yourself in those environments if you can help it. It's not always helpful to you.
And here's a clear example of what kind of how baseline research can help from this past year. There was a case, there was a letter sent to George Mason University from the ADL and the Brandeis Center on behalf of a graduate student who had faced anti-Semitism in a school publication, like student-run publication. The content of what was happening in the case, it wasn't a question whether it was or was not anti-Semitic. It was anti-Semitic. It was bad and needed to be addressed. The student, according to this letter, filled out a bias report for it, never got addressed, and therefore that's like part of the issues that they're talking about with the university. Now, I'm not blaming that the student wasn't in touch with me, right? That's not what I'm saying. But if there was a relationship, if there was an understanding of who at the university, the Hillel director, me, has a good relationship with, i.e., the president and the vice president of university life, then we would have known that that week there were issues with the bias report links, and there were 2 different links that were posted on the website that week. And the university was alerted to it by me, and they were working very quickly to take down the dead link and make sure there was one good link. But what was clear from this case and the letter that was sent was that it was the wrong link at the wrong time, basically. The anti-Semitic event happened. It was bad, and the university needed to address it. And the reason why it wasn't addressed had nothing to do with the failure of anyone in any sort of office. It had everything to do with an IT failure. And I think that added a layer to the conversation that was completely missing from that scenario. The relationship between me and the university, I was given that knowledge. I would have shared that with the student. I would have shared that with the student's parents. We could have tried to address it in our own ways. It could have ended up with the same letter. It could have ended up with the university not doing what it had to do to address it. But again, there's always a story and something we need to unpack. And we do that by being in relationship with those making these decisions and being in partnership with them and not pushing them away.
Well, it's interesting. Oh, so many avenues to go. And so first, I just have to say that my son was at Brandeis, and I saw all over Facebook that there was some issue in, like, I don't know, the apartheid week or something. And so I called him up and I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, I'm studying for my chem exam. Why are you bugging me? Leave me alone." So I do understand what you're saying.
Like, these are real issues. There's real protests. There's real issues. There's terrible things happening. We need to do things to do it. And like,
most kids
what is the bigger picture outside that screen is always what's always
And
on.
also,
Yeah.
what are you, you're calling because you care and because you want to help.
Right.
But oftentimes with good intentions, you just like, should I be worried about that? Your son is confident enough to be like, "Mom,
but
and some students, I see it, I had a student come in this year and she was so upset and she was crying. She was up, we talked it through. It was very clear to me that her mother was adding so much angst because her mother was reading from what was happening on these groups or clicking on these articles. She was immediately calling her daughter, talking about safety and security. Should you do this? Should you do that? And her daughter was like, "I didn't feel unsafe before, but now maybe I need to," and again, it comes from such a good place. I'm a parent too. Like, I get it. You're worried. I understand. But you have so much control in helping, again, bring the temperature down. And listen, there are moments we need to raise the temperature. Absolutely. But not every moment you're reading about in the news headlines is worthy of that temperature raising.
Right. And I do think that what I want to just reference what you said before about knowing what's in your control and what is not, is that when we talk to our kids before they go to college, that is a good conversation to have, and knowing like who your kid is, and are they a kid that there are some kids that want to dismiss all anti-Semitism and they want to say, "Oh, there's not really anything happening." And so how do I know who my kid is and what they need in this moment, and how can I help them? And I think it's important for them to know that you're there as a resource. I assume there's other resources on campus for students, and I guess every school is different, but are there suggestions you would have to tell parents for like what they should do if they're navigating a potential problem?
Yeah. One thing, just to unpack vocabulary to make sure everybody's clear, when Dana was referencing a bias incident report, for the most part, I don't want to say for every single university, there is an infrastructure in place where if you feel that you have somehow either encountered bias or been a victim of bias, a bias incident, you can report it. A lot of the times anonymously. Every university is different. You can report it to say, "This is what happened and this is what I'd like you to investigate," or "I'd like somebody to be in touch," or "I don't want them to be." I always encourage, some students are hesitant at times to report that. It is so important because it helps to track trends, right? So if the university has heard 10 times about the same professor, that's telling them something. So that's number one. Also, in partnership with the ADL, the ADL and Hillel International has another bias incident report. It's a very similar form, but again, it just helps to track trends, to understand what's going on campus. Inevitably, if that student hasn't come to me directly, a colleague from Hillel International will call me and say, "I just want to make sure, are you aware that this student reported this incident at GW?" And it really helps me, again, to either follow up with the student or follow up with an administrative partner. I also would just familiarize yourself. Again, every university is different, but on the whole, you have to remember there's the academic universe and student affairs universe. Those two things are very different. They often, the hierarchy is always different, but understanding kind of who are the people in academic affairs that are calling the shots and who are the people in student affairs that are calling the shots, just to, again, get the lay of the land.
Other resources, even though Adena just said that they're separate, like certainly centers of Jewish studies, centers of Israeli studies, whatever it is, like oftentimes those are also the partners in some regards with, depending on the Hillel. Like, so like, for example, like we have felt and we have heard from many of our students at Mason that they don't have the language or the knowledge of the history and the conflict, and the academic department is running classes on it for credit that can be counted across multiple different kind of requirements of sorts. And so like oftentimes that could be a good educational resource in addition to the discussion cohorts and learning opportunities we do in Hillel. But that's just like the academic side. If that exists to kind of figure out what their kind of role in all of this is. I'll also say, depending on the Hillel, depending on the college, the local Jewish community in that area could be an incredible resource as well. Depending on the Hillel, like a lot of smaller schools might have Shabbat experiences or services or whatever with the local community, and to partner up with them can be kind of an additional kind of family support on the ground, like the pairing off student with parent. If again, just have to look into the websites, look into what the communities offer. Oftentimes students want nostalgic, familiar Jewish community. If they were raised in a synagogue community or Jewish community, they were active in going to a synagogue. Oftentimes going to a synagogue during college is that groundedness that they might need during a crazy situation. So like if they might find the support in working in the religious school at a synagogue, like that all exists as well and is part of everything we're talking about. So look into the Jewish community that is around the certain school that your child is going to.
Right. I think all the educators would appreciate us encouraging them to teach in the religious schools. It's a good resource. So you were talking a little bit about the academics and the professors, and one of the questions in the chat is about AJP, which I'm not even sure what that is, but they're talking about sort of like how much is coming, how many of the issues around anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism are coming from professors? And I know this is just for your specific schools, but do you have a sense of how much is student led or outside students or internal within the staff? And I know that you don't have an official answer, that's not, but I guess if you had a gut sense of it.
Iran, so many choices.
Oh, it's right. It's all Iran. It is.
I will say this: we're in Washington D.C., where we're in the middle of the political universe. There's a very, my sense is there's a large infrastructure operating off campus that understands fully how much campus is a perfect place to get, where can I find impressionable young people who want to fight the fight and do good for the world, and right. And they are utilizing college campuses to achieve their missions. If I look at the encampment in the spring, and I picked 10 average people, my guess would be maybe half would be GW, half would not be GW. And I would also say, many, let's say 8, 7 have really good intentions. I would say maybe aren't as educated as I would like them to be on the issue, but like care about the world and want peace and want to ceasefire, just like I want peace and Dana wants peace, right? And then there are 2 or 3 who I really believe are bad actors who are anti-Semitic in their thought processes and are not there to build any bridges whatsoever. They just want to create harm and chaos and toxicity.
That's helpful. Thank you. Daniel, how about your campus?
I don't want to guess. I'm hearing more and more cases. That's a fact of, oh, this faculty here, this faculty there. I hear it from my colleagues at other Virginia public institutions as well, in terms of perhaps some faculty members who are aligning themselves and being critical actors with the SJP student group. So there's just like a lot to explore and unpack there. I'll share, in addition to like just identifying who the bad actors are and knowing that they're bad actors, the lack of education across the board about anything Israel or anti-Semitism has become so evident. So right, Adena said like the 8 or 10, like the 7 or 8 who just are uneducated about it. Like we have faculty who just don't, this isn't has anything to do with their expertise. They don't know anything about it, but it somehow still seeps into the classroom in some ways. The faculty member wanting to create space for students to process what's happening on campus. They see the Jewish student that they know is Jewish and say, oh, so what do you think as the Jewish student, right? Like unintended and like has a lot of impact, right? A story that I tell all the time is that a student was in a peace conflict class, had nothing to do with Israel, it had something to do with 2 other totally random countries. And Israel wasn't even discussing the entire semester's worth of class in this peace studies class. The article that was assigned for class mentioned the phrase like just like the white settler colonial state Israel, comma, and then went on, right? So it had nothing to do with Israel, just like the author of that article said it. What that does is that faculty, by assigning that article, normalizes that language, right? And so anyone reading who doesn't know anything about what's happening in Israel, just like, oh, okay, so Israel's the white settler colonial state. I mention that because with faculty issues, there needs to be a large collective effort to to deal with this among all the faculty. I mean, I know there's like the academic engagement network out there, the campus climate initiative that Hillel International runs, but this faculty member did not have any intention to say anything anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, but the article did, and for the 20 students in that class, normalized that for them. So it's just like a lot to think about and do, and like obviously I don't have the answers for it, but it's a deep problem. It's a deep problem within the faculty framework that needs to be addressed.
Right. And it seems like they don't even notice it. So like in that particular example, so then that's
And if they haven't been educated, like it's about ignorance. It's about like they don't know. Certainly there's other cases. There's faculty members who do it knowing what they're doing.
yes.
But there needs to be there needs to be strategies to address both of those cases, not just the known bad actors out there.
Okay. And then, well, and this is sort of related in terms of students, like, again, I know you don't have the answer, but this is another question. The chat is like, what percentage of students would you say are anti-Zionist or part of Jewish Voices for Peace? I mean, do we have a sense that that's a huge group, that's a small group?
I still believe it's a minority, but it's certainly a minority that's growing. And I think that I shared this, I believe it at the last time I was at a JCRC event, and I just used this opportunity to say the same. I'm
Sorry, Peter.
I'm a firmly Zionist, and my organization is a Zionist organization, and I'm not going to change that attitude. And I don't think it helps us as a Jewish community to purely shut out that voice or to get defensive about, right? I use the example often that I had a student who came and she wanted to talk to me about having been at the encampment, and it was a very painful conversation, but I really tried to stay open to it because I was so glad that she wanted to come to talk to me about it specifically, not somebody else. She came to the Hillel director because she wanted to grapple with what had happened. And I came home and I shared the story with my husband, and my husband understandably was like, well, does she know this? Does she know that? Does she know this? And I had the same defensiveness. I understand where that defensiveness comes from. But if I ever want her to come back to me, to have a meaningful relationship with Israel, to give Zionism a chance, to do anything meaningful, to contribute to the future of the Jewish state as as we dream it can be, it doesn't help me to just shut her down. So I welcome those conversations. I still have boundaries and borders. And listen, this is a live conversation all day long, actually, in the Hillel Directors listserv today. It was a discussion of, how are we thinking about these students as we start the school year? So it's very much on the minds of my colleagues and I. We don't have easy answers, but I think we have to be, I really want to encourage everyone. There's an article in the New Sources Journal by Rabbi Ben Berger, who works in education at Hillel International, and he talks about the explorer mindset versus the defender mindset. It's such a well done article because I think it helps us frame a little bit.
We'll send that out afterwards to everyone as a resource. Sorry, but explain what it says a little.
Yeah.
JVP popped up at Mason a few weeks ago, so we don't know anything about them, who they are even. We don't know if they're even Jewish students or not, which is a key aspect of the
Very
whole
important.
JVP stuff, right? Like, who are the students is a core question that we need to be asking. What I'll say about the students, the question of like, who is anti-Zionist? Like my initial gut reaction was like, well, what do they even mean by anti-Zionist, right? What do they mean by Zionist? We have to unpack a lot of that with the students. And so like, again, like with Adena, like I don't push them away. We invite that conversation to figure out what they mean. For a lot of my students, like that could mean they hate Bibi Netanyahu, like they hate what's happening. Do they believe in the existence of a Jewish state? Yes. So like, right? Like students are, Gen Z is an incredible population that has an incredible relationship with identification and identifying themselves in various ways. And those the way they identify and define the way they define how they identify changes drastically over the course of their time in college and of course after. And so I don't take a student who says they're anti-Zionist meaning that they want to destroy the Jewish state. They don't believe in the existence of a Jewish state, that they want to wipe out Jews. Even though the collective understanding of the term Zionist and anti-Zionism relates to that, so like that, just exploring that with the student, but I have no idea percentages. It's certainly a minority for Mason, a strong minority.
And I think it's a strong minority for GW. I mean, yeah. The majority of students have a relationship with Israel. They know they should care, but they're trying to figure out what that looks like. That's still a work in progress. In the same way, I would say the students who declare, like Daniel said, that they're anti-Zionist, what does that really mean? When you really start to say, well, what is that? Listen, and I think that's a big thing. And there was a great podcast from the Daily a few months ago where they interviewed a student who was, pro encampment, and he was of Palestinian descent. And they asked him, I think, to define Zionism, and he defined Zionism in a way I never would have defined. I was like, I don't believe in that either, right? My point being, we're using the same words, but we really have to check what each other means, which is a common conversation we need to be having with students too. I think they also, we're doing this fellowship this year, the Z word, right? They view Zionism now as a dirty word, many of them. And we really have to unpack, like, how do you take it back? Why is it a dirty word? What does it mean to you? We need to have those, we almost need to start back at the very beginning on some level in our relationship building with them. It's not just like, let me give you a history of Israel and Zionism and the Palestinian cause. It's like, what is Zionism for you? Let's talk about it.
That's great. I think that's very important. I just want to say thank you to Diane, who she just sent the link to the article Adena mentioned. But I want to say Adena also has a great article in the same sources. So I recommend you read that one as well. And then actually, Diane also added this little free gift if you sign up with Hillel. I think that's where she can tell to add that.
Always Diane, love it, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. There's one more question in the chat, and then I want to ask you a question, but let me find that question, and then and then I'll give you a few minutes to wrap up because I don't want to keep us longer than the hour. Wait, where did it go? Oh yeah, she wrote the entire issue. Americans for Justice in Palestine is headquartered in the Falls Church in Bailey's area. I don't know that you're going to know this, but they are parent organizations that send out posts and online, not on social media, only for SJP. Oh, I think that was just a commentary, not a question. Okay. So my Last question.
I see Amanda's question. Do we have any intelligence about upcoming school year encampments? No. Here's the behind the scenes look at what we're processing. I got lunch with our vice president of University Life on Friday for a few hours, and this is what we're thinking, right? Like, we don't know what's happening. We don't know how the impact of an election season is going to shape campus climate at large. And so does that mean that anti-Israel activists are going to be drowned out, brought into the north? Like, we don't know what's going to happen within the campus sphere there. But it's part of that conversation. For us in the DMV, the question of campus advocacy versus political advocacy downtown is on our minds, meaning like is our SJP chapter still going to focus on campus stuff in Fairfax, or are they going to do what they've done certainly at the end of the year with the collective encampment downtown at GW, or like go keep on doing their quote unquote political advocacy elsewhere? We don't know. And what we always have to remember is that students are in a cycle in time at the university. The student leaders these leaders last year are different than the student leaders who are running these groups this year. So we don't know at Mason, that is, like, what the SJP current leadership is planning on doing. They have not been in touch with the university at all, whereas last year they were in touch with the university to give them a heads up for things. So those are kind of the up in air questions. That doesn't answer your question, Amanda, but like is what we're talking about and thinking through and questioning behind the scenes.
All of that by GW. I would say two other things that are on our minds, or a question mark, is one, there was a tactic towards the end of last year at some schools, I'm thinking about Pitt in specific, where these groups would call for a severing of ties with Hillel. So we don't know whether we're going to be more kind of, I don't want that to happen. And yet I actually think it's a much clearer cut, like it's anti-Semitic. It's actually a clearer cut argument, I think, to make. So even though I don't want it to happen, it actually, I don't want to say it doesn't trouble me. It troubles me deeply, but it's just like a different set of equations and thinking points on that issue. Another thing that just came up recently with a partner at the administration, she just brought up today, was, you know, when a successful advocacy tactic happens, other causes view it as a new advocacy tactic they could take on. So for example, we might have an encampment at GW in September, but it might be for a completely different, you know, God willing, this war ends, right? Dreams. This war ends and we moved on and there's a new issue. Maybe it's reproductive rights, whatever it happens to be. And suddenly there's an encampment on that. So lots of, again, which goes back to what is within our control and what is not. All of those things. I talk to the police chief all the time. I talk to the president of the university. I talk to the dean of students. Nobody has the answers, but we're all thinking about what we can control versus what we can't.
And I think I appreciate just the conversation and the thoughts about what you're thinking about, how you're approaching. I think is important for all of us to hear. There were two good questions that came in. So sorry, I said I was ending, but we're going to ask these. What advice do you have for those who may not have a Hillel director on their campus?
Donate the money for one. No.
Great.
Jewish community infrastructure. What Jewish community is around that area to support that student during that time? Listen, my brother, I remember, did a summer at Governor's School in Lynchburg, Virginia. And there's a synagogue in Lynchburg that he went to every Friday night that summer. Like stuff like that, like Jewish community, like the beauty of Judaism is we're community based. Let's rely on our community partners in good faith for that.
Beautiful. Anything to add?
No.
Okay.
Perfect.
This is also I'm hearing this a lot, Amy. So hello, I'm a college counselor, essay coach. And my question is, Jewish college applicants are so nervous to even mention they're Jewish for fear of discrimination. Also, many parents refuse to apply to certain schools because of hate. Do you have a sense of admissions office in terms of fairness? How can I assure them it won't be held against them? Any specific going on to protect Jewish applicants from having their religion held against them?
Yeah, great question. And it makes me sad, but great question. I want to start on the second piece to go back to the first. I never, ever, ever tell a student. I called up my friend Brian Cohen, who's the director at Columbia Hillel, which you could argue was the worst of the worst. And I said, Brian, I'm just curious. Are you still would you tell your daughter she could go to Columbia? And he said, absolutely. We need her. Right. So this whole concept where families, and I have lots of friends with kids going to college, like this is off, I'm not going to go to this school, but I am going to go to again, there are lots of bad headlines, and there are also lots of vibrant Jewish communities out there. So I just really would caution someone from putting something on an X list as it pertains to hate and anti-Semitism, because also all of this is so unpredictable. We've just said we don't know what's happening in a month. Who knows what life's going to look like in a year, right? God willing, much better. That's number one. But going back to the first question, if an admissions counselor is going to judge you because you say you're Jewish, then you don't want to go to that school, right? I'm contradicting myself. I would never want to message to one of my students that I was working with applying to school, hide your Jewish identity, right? Because that goes back also, Amy, I would just say, and I know you're not doing that, it goes back to we all have a role to play. I would want you to have a great conversation with that student who said, if you're thinking about your Jewish identity and what it means and that you want to wear it on your sleeve, then go for it. And if they want you to be there, they'll welcome you. And if they don't, then you're not going to get in everywhere, and that's okay. But it's a moment of opportunity for identity development for the student. And you are the one who holds the keys to the castle on that conversation. So what an opportunity.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Anything you want to add on that? Okay. And then Deborah just put a reminder that 25% of the kids turn over every year, which is you forget sometimes in Hillel how short our memory is. And so thank you. I want to say personally, I appreciate all that you're doing. I know it isn't always easy. I did want to just one more question before I give you a chance to do final thoughts, is that some of us on the call, our kids have already graduated, our kids aren't yet in college. How can what would be helpful to you as Hillel directors that are working really, really hard to make this a great place for our Jewish kids? How is community members who don't have kids in your school, how can we be helpful? Don't call you. Sorry.
Same stuff. Baseline research, figure out what's happening, be in conversation, productive inquiry, and be our cheerleaders on the ground, knowing and figuring out what it means to support. Adena's point of what did students need? Amazon wish list, bam. Writing the question, there was a month where everyone just wanted to write letters, which was lovely, and we did it and we put them out, and the students that read them really loved it. The little touch points I think really mean a lot, but just collective understanding and learning about the case at hand, what's happening, what environment they sit in. Certainly if you're in Virginia and talking about public schools, there's a lot of political advocacy that can be done around this too, that I can talk about offline, and happy to, but just research, know, and be in supportive conversation.
Yeah. I know that Sarah mentioned about this article that I wrote. There's a Clips Notes version. There's a podcast about the article too. So you wanted to write it. I've been working on it for a year. I wanted it to be a tool for this exact question, which is, my dream is to take your outrage at what is happening in our world against the Jewish people and channel it in more positive directions, right? That might mean sending a little treat to a college student, or sending something to a puzzle from the Amazon wish list, right? Or it might mean looking inwards and saying, what in my localized Jewish community, it's clear this university doesn't need me, but what in my localized Jewish community can I be doing to increase Jewish identity development for the people that are around me? There is so much that we can be doing in this moment. And I think we get stuck when we start to feel hope. Rachel Goldberg-Cohen always says, hope is mandatory. I have those days too. This morning, I was feeling so hopeless about the news headlines, but there is always a way to do something beneficial for the Jewish people. Channel your sadness into that and not into this despair and outrage that I think we all often fall prey to.
And sort of on that note, I think also feeding into these Facebook groups. So Deborah, I'm not sharing the Facebook group you suggested on here because I think a lot of times these Facebook groups just enhance I mean, people can find them if they want, but I feel like it just makes us amplify what might not be exactly what is happening on the ground. But I just want to share Amy's she said her son went to Duke. Hillel had a fabulous program, Chicken Soup Hotline, where the rabbi visited 6 kids. It was great conversation and wonderful intro to Hillel. And his mom, and the mom could sign him up for a visit. So I love that. Okay. I assume every campus does not have that, but okay. So are there any, last thoughts, words of wisdom? I just want to say, I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this. I do know how complicated it is. And I feel like in the heat of the moment, I see myself, like, I don't want to think about the complicated nature. I don't want to think about it. I just want to be mad. And so I understand that desire to just do something. So I appreciate like your patience with it and your willingness to be there, because the work you're doing is invaluable. And I know it's hard. I know it's exhausting. And I want to thank you both for what you do.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.
And if you want to share a last thought, you're welcome to. If you don't, we can all go to bed. No.
I'm sharing a quick COVID story, which is this. I heard early on in COVID when we were all stuck inside feeling bad for ourselves, someone said, the minute you feel bad, check in on 3 friends, right? I think that concept has stayed with me and applies to this too. The minute you're like, oh, what's happening? Find 3 productive things to do. Check in on a college student, check in on a local neighbor who's Jewish and might be more isolated, and do something nice at your local community center, for someone in a bridge, build a bridge. There's always if I've said that 17 times, I'll say it again. There's always things within our control. And I just hope we can all find a way collectively, because it cannot be all on the weight of college university presidents and Hillel directors. We need everyone to be a part of building a stronger Jewish future.
Get out of my head, because yes, and I wanted to share just a piece of like Jewish wisdom and Torah that just has been in my mind all year and continues to be on my mind right now, which is there's a teaching from our rabbis in the oral literature called the Mishnah, where when he went up to the Temple Mount, they painted this picture of what the normal way to walk into the Temple Mount was. And the teaching says you enter the Temple Mount, you turn right, you walk around the courtyard, and then you exit through the door that you went through. But then the teaching says, like, that's the normal way. But if something has happened to you, that's like kind of the best translation I've worked around with. Like, if something has happened to you, you enter that courtyard and you turn left. So I'm going to try to do this on my Zoom screen. I haven't done it in a while, but like, so imagine entering the courtyard. Is this working? Like, do you imagine? Okay, you enter the courtyard and you have people walking right and left all around the courtyard. And then they interact with one another. Person who turned right interacts with the person who turned left. And the teaching says the person who turned right is supposed to say, Malach, Malacha, like, what is to you? How are you? Literally, how are you? Check in on 3 people. Dina's comment. How are you? That person's supposed to respond, and the person on the right is supposed to engage with words of comfort. And then you go on, and then it continues to happen all throughout. So the Mishnah is painting this picture of people reaching out to other people and engaging in conversation with them, right? You start with the question, you start with how they're doing, you engage in conversation and collective empathy, and you work together to solve tough problems in the world. And I think that's what we need to do as a Jewish community, and I'm grateful to be in community with all of us in doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of the summer before school starts in.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.